Welcome back, Python students. In the second tutorial, we're going to accomplish three things. We're going to learn about a new way of documenting our code called PyDocs. I'm going to give you a tour of the utility classes that I built for you that you'll be using, as well as adding some content to. And finally, I'll be giving you a sneak preview of some strategies we'll talk a bit more about in the next lesson also, about how to get ready for your project for this section, including some challenges from this tutorial itself. The first thing I'd like you to do is in PyCharm, head to File, and Settings. And we're going to toggle a new setting on that's going to be very helpful for making sense of the functionality that we're building and being a bit more organized overall. Under Settings, pop open your editor and the General Settings and head down to the Code Completion tab, where make sure, actually, if you don't have this already, Show Suggestions as you type is a nice one to have enabled if you don't already. And the one that we're going to make sure is enabled is Show the Documentation pop up in, well, I have it at after 1 second, 1000 milliseconds. You can make this lower or bigger as you see fit, and then hit OK. And my baby is deciding to add her own commentary, so enjoy the cute squeaks. And what this is going to allow my code to do, or PyCharm to do for me, is if I type in this reader object that I've instantiated here, and I select one of my methods, I can now see some information being shown on the side. Information that tells me what kind of stuff this method requires. It already tells me the names of the variables I'm expecting here, but in here it's actually telling me what type of information I'm looking for, as well as a description that I have created about this method. And I'm going to show you how to make these in this section so you can make your code a bit more self-documenting. So we're going to kind of replace some of our comments with these PyDoc type things. More on that in a sec. You'll notice in my runner class, I'm going to share this with you for this project, I've imported my file read and file write classes. I've also imported in advance some encryption and decryption classes that we haven't made any content for yet. I just made a bit of a constructor here, but we'll talk a bit more about that to come. But for now, I want us to look at, and I suggest you look alongside me in the code that I shared with you, these two classes, file read and file write. And notice I've given you a few notes from last lesson at the top here, but what I provided you with is what I consider a utility class. It's basically a class full of different behaviors that have usefulness for the project to come. It has a utility to serve my needs later on. And so it's a bunch of functionality that solves different problems for me that might be able to be wielded in algorithms to come, as well as a to-do list at the bottom of each of things that I would like you to create for yourself. So the first thing I'll show you is the very top method here, read first line from file. This is simply going to take in a file name, and it's going to try to open the file, and then simply just read in the first line and print it out to the console. Something we did last lesson, nice and simple. All the code is here. Maybe I'll get rid of that extra space here. But the new piece of content you see here is this. This triple, I guess it's apostrophe that you put, just like this, triple apostrophe. And then PyDoc will complete the other three. Anything that you type in here will end up being the text that pops up when I type in the method elsewhere. So you'll see here, my read first line from file in my reader says, print out the contents from the first line of a file. Let's go to my runner, and I'll go my reader, and I want to get read first line from file, print out the contents from the first line of a file. My note is now hanging right here to remind me what the purpose of this method is. The description pops up. So this documentation style allows me to have information in a different class about this particular behavior. Really useful. Sometimes before we've been just making kind of a comment here above it describing what the method does. You can still do that, but it's also nice to put them in the PyDoc, and you can only put it here if you want to, technically, as a way of commenting, but also allowing this comment to live outside of this particular section of our code. Really useful. And I want to see you doing this consistently from now on. You'll notice I've made some for all the functionality I provided you, assuming I haven't missed anything. It looks like I haven't. Okay, so we're going to have these PyDocs appearing everywhere. And next, I want to take you on a tour of some of the other methods I've created for you that I'd like you to test out yourself to make sure that they're working properly. It makes sure you understand them. But the main idea to glean from this is that I provided myself lots of different options for interacting with data that I have built. So I can read just one line from the file. Maybe I have a bunch of files and I want to be able to just check which is the right one. I can just run this on different files, and it prints out the first line so that I can just kind of see what the contents of that file are without getting myself in too deep and reading too many of the contents. Really useful. Or I've allowed myself to read the whole file line by line. So in this case, I'm actually going to be reading in the first line, and then I'm saying while line. What this is doing is it's saying while line actually has data assigned to it. And that means that every time I actually get a valid line of information, this will be true. Then I'm going to print it out, and then I'm going to get the next line. And then if that still has data, I print it out. As soon as this runs out of information, this will now be null, and the loop will end. So this succeeds at printing out every line from the file, one line at a time. Awesome. How about get file all lines? This is going to return a list of file contents, one line per entry in this list. So you'll see I return at the end some data. That's a list that I generated at the start. But while I'm running this loop, I'm actually appending line by line to the data that gets returned. This could be really useful for snagging data from a file and storing it in your program to be processed or printed or manipulated or encoded later. A hint for you. Or I can just get all data from the file at once, in this case, and I'm just going to return it as one big string, because this kind of pulls it in all at once. A nice simple method here, but might be useful just to have everything all at once in a big string that I can process in a different way later. And I've still included this removing the new lines functionality from last lesson in case you find that necessary and useful to get the data presented in a way that works for you and how you're working with things. So some helpful reader methods. You might think of some that might be useful for your particular problems later. That you're like, I need to do this multiple times. I need to be able to gather data in this way from a file. Well, build a utility method here, and then you'll be able to reference it and use that functionality over and over again later on in your future work. Super helpful. What do I want you to create? Well, to practice working with files and to test your ability to actually understand how to make some algorithms with this new skill set. First, I want you to create a method that returns the total number of lines of data in a file. Nice and straightforward, but I also want you to make another one that returns the total number of words in the file, as well as the number of characters in a file. So you're going to have to get a little bit more creative to determine the number of words. Quick hint, delimiters is useful for this. But how about number of characters in a file? This is going to require you to think about figuring out, well, the length of strings. And maybe if you can gather the number of words, but then also figure out the length of each of those words, maybe there's something you can do to combine your logic in these sections. Clever students will find that these all interconnect really nicely to make your life a bit easier. And if you're struggling a little bit, you make them all separately. Take a bit more time, but I just want to say that you solved the problem. Next, create a method that returns whether or not a file contains a given word or phrase, so that you could look and say, hey, does the file contain the word duck? And it'll tell you true or false. Finally, a method that returns a list that only includes words of a certain length. For example, all the words with 3 letters in them. So, hey, look at this file and snag all the 11-letter words from it just to kind of see. And I want to show you another thing right now that I have available to you to look at in this section. I'll be providing you this all words file, which includes, actually can't remember right now if I showed you this in the last tutorial or not, because I'm recording this another evening. So I can't remember if I showed you this, but it has all the words in the English language, at least a huge number of them. There's 466,544 words in here. Some of them are kind of debatably words, but there's enough of a list here that you could actually think about comparing your information to or gathering data from. So think about testing, over here, this method, the reader that returns the total number of words of a certain length. Think about running it on this file, and you'll be able to find out what are all the 15-letter words in English. You should be able to retrieve it from this file by reading from it, and I'll give you this file to work with. And yeah, beautiful. Actually, just to see this file in action, why don't we do a quick reader here just to test this out. And in my reader, I want to get, let's read file line by line, and let's just get it from, what do we call it, allwords.txt, and see what happens when I run this. And see here, every one of those words is just being read into my program all the way to that ZZZ at the end. One thing I will point out, though, is that the PyCharm console runs out of space, and I actually don't see the start of this file. I promise you, the start of the file was processed. We just kind of ran out of space on what's stored here. A bit of a limitation of PyCharm. But there we go. I have access to all those words now. I could have stored them in a data structure. I can think about searching them and organizing the ones of certain lengths. Lots of things we can do with that. Okay, let's look at some of the writing tools that I provided you here. The first one, and here we're going to see lots of different options that I provided for the different scenarios I might want to work with. Write string over file overwrites the previous file's contents, whereas write string to file appends the data. Notice I open a different type of writer, or well, an open with a write functionality and an open with an append functionality. Everything else is the same. I'm just writing the string that's sent to this, but in the unique way for each of these methods. So I have all that functionality built. If I want to write over a file, I just reference my utility method here. And if I want to write to a file, to append, I run this utility method with a string being sent. Oops. I've also built a method for you that instead of accepting a string, accepts a data structure like a list. And it will loop through the entire list and then write each entry to the file. In the first case, replacing the file's contents. In the second case, appending all of the information in that data structure to the file. So basically, these are all doing the same thing, except that the first two are dealing with strings being sent, the second two with data structures, and the first one of each pair overwrites, the second one appends. Really functional. I've solved these problems in advance because I know I'm going to have to do these things in the future. So I've made myself a utility program to kind of create this functionality in advance that I can reference later. I also have this custom one that has a delimiter, meaning that when I'm writing an entry, instead of having a new line after each entry, I can now have a custom delimiter between them. That could be a number of spaces. It could be a character of some kind. You can decide for yourself, maybe a tab or an indent or something. You can decide when you run this what the delimiter might be. Why don't we just run this really quick and see how this works? Write data, over file custom. Okay, and the way that this works over here, I need a file name and I need some data and I need a delimiter in between the data here. So I don't really have any data yet. Let's just make some quick data. I'm just going to create some data that's going to equal, well, let's go a list, and I'm going to go data, append to it, hello, and let's go data, append, and by, and I'm feeling really creative tonight apparently, and data.append. I thought I said by already. And so to this custom file that I'm writing, the file name, let's just call this output test.txt. Remember, if it's a new file, I'll just create a new one, and then the data and the delimiter. So let's put in my data as my data that I'm sending, and my delimiter, I'm going to make it this, I don't know, just a bunch of dashes in a row with some space here. Run this program, and now if I head over here to my folder, I have my output test and hello by, I thought I said by already, with that custom delimiter in between each entry. So that's kind of a customization that I've done there that we can see up and running. Test this stuff out for yourself. Make sure that it makes sense to you. What else do we got built in here that I want to explain? I've also provided the option for appending versus writing. And here's a couple examples that I've given that are kind of touching on a little bit of stuff from next week, but I wanted to show you some strategies that you could look over and study and learn from for some customized ways of displaying data and writing it to a file. The first one just writes the numbers from 1 to 100 to a file. And in this case, I'm actually allowing it to accept a Boolean for whether or not I append it. So this is a different strategy. You could think about integrating the same strategy into some of these methods. So instead of having two options, I have one that has the ability to accept a Boolean, in which case I send it to different helper classes, or sorry, helper methods in here. But let's first just take a look over this. I'm going to explain this one to you in detail and let you figure out the advanced one on your own if you're interested, because there's a lot more going on in this that might be a little bit above your head, but for those who are really keen, something to sink your teeth into right now. So what I'm going to be doing in this is looping over the number of rows, which is 10, and then the number of entries in each row, which is 10, to print 100 numbers. And, oh, I'm going to remove this. That's just for testing. And then I'm going to actually, build in a tabbed over string version of the number to space them out really nicely. And then I'm going to concatenate the new entry, this next entry that I've generated from the number I'm at to this master string that I'm writing to. Then I'm going to increase my number. I'm going to increase it all the way until 100, which is what this double loop is accomplishing. Let me get rid of that tester stuff. And then I'm going to add a new line after each row. And then I'm going to send it to the appropriate write to string method. So notice I'm letting my methods work together in this case to save on writing some code to actually write this to a file. So let's go back to my runner, and we're going to write numbers to file. My writer, I'm going to write numbers to 100 to file. I'm going to call this a counter, and I'm going to say false. Let's just override any data that's there already. Run this, head back over here. I got my counter right here, and let's see what this looks like. There we go. The number is 1 to 100. They started indented. Maybe you want to change it to not start indented if you want. And they have a nice consistent spacing between them. Wonderful. What does this other method do? This write numbers to file advanced. Well, I notice it needs a file name, an append, a max number, and a numbers per row. So I can choose the number I want it to count to, but I can also choose how much information is displayed on each row as a custom way of organizing the output. There's some more fancy stuff going on in this algorithm, but I'm going to put this to the out or the counter.txt again, just to do so. I'm going to override the data that's there already. That's not append. And then let's make this go up to like 10,000 with, I don't know, what if we do 16 entries per row? Run this. I have just a couple printouts just for my own kind of management of things in the background. And let's take a look at what this does. Check this out. 1 to 16, 16 numbers per row. Every row has 16 entries, and it counts in its beautifully organized way all the way down to 10,000. This went in evenly. What if we change the numbers? We can now count really high. What about 100,000, but I put 13 per line? When I run this, head back over to my file. Now notice the maximum number of entries in a line is 13. But this runs all the way down, printing out all the values till 100,000 with the overflow at the end, just ending at the end of the file here. So I've created an algorithm that's really quite powerful. I can count kind of as high as I want. There's one limiting factor, which if you're really wanting to learn about this algorithm more, would be the actual, where's my thing here? The custom aligner that I use to kind of keep content spaced out in a nice way with the size of the numbers here. There's some really cool stuff going on in how I'm actually controlling the output of information in this algorithm that you could think about studying a little bit more and maybe implementing some cool ideas in the challenges, which you got 3 for this section. The first one, I want you to create a method that can join 3 different files together into a single file. So you're pulling in data from 3 different places, 3 different file names, and then combining all the information, into a single file that you write to, because this is the file write section. The second one is a method that creates a new file with the contents of the all words text file sorted by word length rather than alphabetically. This could also be a different text file, just sorting all the content, but this is the one that I'll be checking your logic with. So right now the words are sorted alphabetically. I want you to sort them by word length. So all the 1 length words are first, and then all the highest length words are last. And finally, create a method that writes all sent data, either a string or a list, you can decide, to a file with a common format decided by you. So your method should accept data of some kind in a certain format, and then it writes to a file with a different format that you decide. Maybe it's with a certain spacing, maybe with a certain delimiter. I want to see you practicing controlling and managing the outflow of data in a customized way. Okay, I think that's more than enough for one tutorial. So lots to think about. Test out these methods and then work on building your own before you watch the next video. I'm actually not going to solve any of these for you, but just it's a good practice to practice and get confident, can't speak right now, with these challenge things first to really practice this file IO content before we talk about our project for the section, which is the second thing you'll be assessed on. So good luck with them. Try your best to get all these completed and enjoy.